So today I will be refuting the claim of fact speech that GMO foods pose more of a threat to its consumers than a benefit. My opponent's secondary claims were that 1, GMO foods are harmful to nature, that 2, that GMO foods have a negative health effect on its consumers, and that 3, GMO foods contaminate forever. My response to these claims are that my opponent did not give sufficient evidence to prove that GMO foods pose more of a threat to consumers than a benefit. Going to my opponent's first claim that GMOs are harmful to nature, he stated that GMO crops and their associated herbicides can harm birds, insects, amphibians, marine ecosystems, and soil organisms. But he failed to include just how many of these species have been affected. He only stated that they can harm these species, but he didn't state that they are harming these species. He did not mention the numbers affected of these species, but only used the monarch butterfly as one example of a depleting species due to GMOs. But based on the world wildlife, the main factor of the monarch butterfly depletion is due to climate change, of drought, and mentions nowhere anything about GMOs being a factor. My opponent's second claim was that GMO foods have a negative health effect on its consumer. My opponent used a piece of evidence that clearly states in the Viance Nutrition website he used that in 2012, the American Medical Association stated they saw no reason for labeling genetically modified foods, clearly an issue that isn't needed. In his evidence, he quoted that since the introduction of GMOs in the mid-1990s, the number of food allergies has skyrocketed. The health issues such as autism, digestive problems, and reproductive disorders are on the rise. Ironically, the same quote by Viance Nutrition my opponent found in his evidence is also in his first article of evidence by Institute for Responsible Technology, stating that although there is not sufficient research to confirm that GMOs are a contributing factor to all these health issues, doctors' groups tell us not to wait before we start protecting ourselves. The article wants to blame GMOs for the number of health problems, yet they too believe that there is not sufficient evidence to support this claim. The fact that one article chose to leave out this crucial piece of evidence out just shows that the evidence is inadequate. Also, this proves that GMOs cannot be blamed for the small rise in health issues since the mid-1990s. His evidence states that the introduction of GMOs in the mid-1990s were the cause to health problems, but may I also stress that this is a 9 to 10 year gap from where these health problems could have occurred, and it could have been caused to anything health related, not purposely GMOs. And they also state that doctors tell us to start taking care of ourselves, but they fail to say which doctors have stated this. According to the Agricolum under the CPP-EDU website, GMOs are in almost everything and every virtual food, from vegetables, fruit, and grain you've ever eaten, and that there is no evidence that any transgenic crop has harmed humans. No specific studies link GMOs as a harmful food group. My opponent's final secondary claim is that GMO foods contaminate forever. To use the bold word forever is to be able to predict the future, and that GMOs are permanently contaminating foods for the futures to come, and that is not the case. Also, there was zero evidence to back up his claim that GMO foods contaminate forever. He uses farmers as an example of victims who've been subjected to lawsuits, but does not mention the number of farmers being affected. For all we know, it could have simply been one farmer affected. He states Monsanto as a company that files these lawsuits against these farmers, but matter-of-factually, Monsanto has reported on their website that they only filed lawsuit against 147 farmers in the US. This may sound like a lot, but when you consider that we sell seeds to almost 325,000 farmers, it's really a small number. The percent of that many farmers that are being affected for these lawsuits is only 0.0004% of farmers. That is clearly not a significant amount of farmers who are becoming victims of natural crop crossover. I'd like to conclude with and emphasize that my opponent did not give us sufficient evidence to prove that GMO foods pose more of a threat to its consumers than a benefit.
All right, well, everything was easy to follow. On the first point, you emphasized the evidence only said can, and then you did cite that the only example that they cited was the monarch butterfly, and I thought you had a very good counterclaim on that particular point. Your analysis of the quotes in the second point I thought were interesting. I'm not sure that it necessarily demonstrates that there isn't sufficient data, but they definitely can't prove it at this particular point. And I like the AMA study or conclusion at the beginning that there's no significant difference. I think your explanation about the 9 to 10-year gap is not very clearly explained, and there's a little bit of a press about what doctors are making this warning, and then you've got to come back with a nice summary kind of claim before you get to the last point that says, you know, that we've got this generic evidence. There's no evidence that specifies any particular harm that occurred to this. That's kind of a general catch-all piece of information, but given the argument or the evidence that the advocate presents, I think that that's a reasonable answer on those particular points. On the forever point, I thought you did a nice job analyzing the statistical information on the lawsuits. Also, the one way maybe you could have strengthened that would have an example of one of those lawsuits and show that, in fact, those farmers had violated the patents in this particular situation, and it wasn't just cross-contamination, that Monsanto had a legitimate argument in these particular cases. But I like the statistical analysis that you had there. A little too much reading, though.